In my last video, I built this pantograph mechanism for allowing the router to carve out a shape, and in this video I'm going to make the plunge mechanism for the router to slide in and out on here on the base. Now, an obvious question is, why not just use the built-in plunge mechanism of the router, but I actually need a bit more range than the router has. Let me explain using my other Pantorouter. When cutting tenons, those are always cut off the edge of the table, and it's nice to be able to back away a fair bit from that so that you don't have to cut the tenon all at once. But if you're cutting a mortise, that's typically done with a workpiece completely on the table, which means you need to plunge forward well onto the table, and that means the plunge range you need is actually at least twice as much as the longest tenon you're going to cut, and a built-in plunge mechanism on a router is just not going to do it. A good solution to the plunge problem is to use linear bearings running on precision ground rods like on this metal Pantorouter from Japan. But they can be expensive, and you can't just walk into your local home center and buy them, and they also take up a fair bit of vertical space. So I'm going to use something else. I'm going to make some linear glides out of drawer slides, and this one I've mostly already done. It's very tight, a long ball track, and it's got the right range of motion. You could make these out of some keyboard drawer slides, or you could use a center drawer slide, but what you should not use is the very common full extension telescoping variety drawer slides, because these have a slide within a slide, so you get twice the amount of play, especially on the outer one, and if you try to get rid of the outer one and just mount the inner one directly, it's not flat, so it's very difficult to mount, so I don't recommend using these ones. Recently I found these at Lowe's, and they're center drawer slides and don't have an extra hardware attached, because for instance with these ones you have to drill out the welds. So I'm going to use one of these, and the only extra bit that it's got attached is this thing here. This slide has got a relatively short ball cage, and I should double that up to get more rigidity. But there are these tabs here that keep the cage from sliding out, so I'm going to have to grind off this tab here. The grease here is now contaminated with all the grinding, so I'm just going to wipe away the grease, and I'll have to re-grease that later. Most of these tracks are about the same dimensions, so I'm getting an extra ball cage out of one of these funny things that I've gotten out of the garbage. And here's the track extracted from that, and ideally I want maybe about 32 centimeters worth of ball track, so I should cut that off right about here. I also need this track to be just 43 centimeters long. That means I should cut it right about here. That left a slight burr, so I'll just clean it up with a file. So I just added a hook to the end of the inner rail, so that when I put this all together with the second ball cage and I slide this in, that will keep the ball cages in here pushed in the middle when I go to the end of the range. Now, before I put this together, I have to make sure that I have no play along the length of its run. So let's see, it's pretty tight here. Tight, tight, tight. Tight, yeah, so this track is pretty tight to begin with. I won't have to make any adjustments to this one. I have used tracks before that were a little bit loose, and so imagine that it was a little bit loose here, that I had some play here. What I do is move the balls out of the way, and then squeeze that in a vise progressively harder and try again and again until I got tight. Next, I need to drill some bigger mounting holes in here, and that's best done with the rails all apart, so I'm just going to pull this all out, making sure not to lose any balls. I just drilled the pilot holes for where the screw holes are going to go, and I'm going to mount these rails using some 832 countersink screws. To bring the holes up to the right size, I'm going to drill a larger hole in, and then to make a countersink for the screw head, I'm going to use an even bigger drill and just use the tip of it to chamfer out that edge. I'm just going to deburr these holes with a larger drill. This is the plunge sled, and the pantograph mounts on here, and on the bottom side mounts the larger outside part of the tracks. And I've already marked roughly where these need to go. They're 26 centimeters apart, and they need to be centered roughly this way. I need to make sure that this other track is exactly 26 centimeters from the first one and exactly parallel. So I made this piece on the table saw, and this cut are exactly 26 centimeters apart, and then I cut that down the middle, so these are identically spaced, and now I can use that, always referencing off of the right edge, so that I can ensure this is going to be mounted parallel on here. Now I can attach the large rails to the bottom here using the screws and mounting holes I just drilled. The plunge sled moves like this on the base, so I still need to mount the tracks on the bottom of that. And those are going to be the smaller tracks, and they're also a little bit shorter because the idea is as this slides back and forth, it'll always cover that track. So the placement of these is 4.5 centimeters from the back, and they're 39 centimeters long, whereas these ones are 43 centimeters. Now, to ensure these are going to be exactly the same spacing as on the bottom, I'm using my same spacers here to position the second track with respect to the first one. And now just mark where the holes go. Getting the nuts on here is always very fiddly. Now it's time to put the ball cages back in, and that's always a very fiddly sort of thing to do. I'm only going to put a ball in every third position for now because this whole thing needs to come apart again before I varnish it. I'm adding one extra little screw here, and that's to prevent the ball cages from accidentally getting pushed out of here, and that way I'll be sure to retain all the balls. And I have to put this off to the side so that the tracks, especially the tabs at the end of them, will still fit through here. Now I've tightened down these bottom ones while making sure that the spacing is exactly right, and for the ones on top I still have the screws a little bit loose, and now I can try to mate these together, and hopefully they'll just fit onto each other. Now with the top tracks having moved to fit with the bottom ones, I can tighten the nuts that hold them. So now I've got a plunge action for my pantograph, And the beauty is because it's all ball glides, even if I apply force on the side, there's no risk of it jamming or racking. So this was the next bit on the Pantorouter. In my next video, I'm going to build the table that holds the stock right here and the template holder that goes back here.